Microphone check. 1, 2. I hope you guys can hear me. Just going to do a quick mic check before I begin talking. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I see I have 3 viewers already here. So you guys can let me know, please, if you can hear me well, just so I don't have any issues afterwards. Hi, Hugh. I am very thankful. You're one of the constant supporters of the channel. Loud and clear. Perfect. Thank you for joining. I'll wait a few minutes before I begin. And again, let's do our traditional where you're tuning in from. So Hugh's tuning in from Ontario, Oblast. And yeah, so you guys can let me know where you're tuning in from. And I have already 10 viewers. So you guys can let me know exactly where you're from. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you for confirming, George, that my microphone is working well. Boulder, Colorado. Nice. I need to go to Colorado at least once to visit all those cool hiking trails and mountains as well. The skiing, Quebec, nice. Canada, like Quebec City or Quebec, just like a province, because there's a city as well. Okay, perfect. So today's live stream is going to be obviously, I made a video yesterday about just the atrocious terrorist act by the Russians in Kiev against the Ahmadit Children's Hospital. So I talk a little bit about that because there are some implications with the summit that's gonna start. Well, already started, but the official talks will probably be tomorrow and on the 11th, where we're probably gonna get a summary of what was agreed upon. So I'll talk a little bit about that, a little bit about U.S. elections, and just some questions that you guys may write in the comment section or the chat section that I'll try to respond to, or just some general chatter. It's been a while since I've done a live stream, and honestly, I think last time was in February. So it's way overdue, and I really love, talking with you guys, and doing a quick live stream, and just having it more personal rather than just making videos all the time. So again, a huge thank you for tuning in and supporting the channel, but most importantly, also supporting the Ukrainian cause. So yeah, that's what I'm going to start with, Ahmadit, and what happened. How come Russia is still able to strike Ukraine, with long range weapons, even though apparently Ukraine has Patriot systems and brand new Western weapon systems. And the problem is that, of course, Ukraine doesn't have many of them, right? I think at best Ukraine has a dozen now, following all the commitments from whether it be US or Germany. Germany has really supported Ukraine heavily. I think they've already given 3 or 4, and I think they will give more Patriot systems in the future, and they have their own, the RST as well. But there simply isn't enough. And even if Ukraine had 100 of them, it still wouldn't be enough for Ukraine to be able to cover the sky at 100%. Right? Like Russia is a monster in terms of its weapons production, and its missiles production is something that is relatively easy to make, right? Compared to, let's say, an advanced tank or a ship. And this is something that Russia is pretty good at, unfortunately, building missiles, different bombs, and we've seen how devastating they have been. So again, as I've said many times in the past, you can't underestimate Russia. They have plenty of tricks in their bag, and they're capable of a lot still. And as well, they're more capable because China and Iran and even North Korea, which is kind of a satellite to China, but it's still really giving Russia the necessary support to continue this war. And so Russia has the weapons and the missiles capable to strike Ukraine. Still to this day, even if Ukraine has advanced NASAMS and Patriots and RSTs, it's still not enough, right? And so I hope that in this NATO summit, Zelensky has already mentioned that this is one of his goals, is to get as many systems, air defense systems as possible, and F-16s, right? Because I've talked about it last week that the F-16s, based on what the Ukraine Air Force has mentioned, they're going to primarily utilize them right now to shoot down Russian missiles, right? Because we've seen how devastating these attacks have been, not only on civilian infrastructure, but also the power generating infrastructure in Ukraine. They've struck the hydroelectric dam in Dnipro, or Zaporizhia, apologies, in Zaporizhia, one of the biggest hydro generating power stations in Ukraine and also in Europe. As a matter of fact, of course, it doesn't compare to Switzerland or other countries, but quite a massive complex that was built during the Soviet Union. And there's multiple other examples. The thermal power plants near Kiev Oblast, and this has been really devastating. So Zelensky needs to really push through here and really make the U.S., specifically the Biden administration, understand how critical it is to have a strong response here, because what the Russians committed yesterday was a true war crime against humanity. They've killed dozens of children and innocent civilians. Parents and doctors perished as a result of that. It's horrible. And again, as I've mentioned in my previous video yesterday, imagine if that was your child. Imagine if you were a father or mother or grandparent, and that's what happened, let's say, to your grandchildren or children. It's horrifying to think about it. Yeah, so thank you, Hugh. Ukraine will prevail. Russia has shown us who they really are. They're forever isolated from the free world. Yobani Rusni. Yep, I totally agree. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of convincing to do. Although I totally, the West has really understood what Russia is, but it needs a little bit more balls. And unfortunately, there's still some countries that are outside of this Western system, like India today. Modi went to pay a visit to Putin, President Modi of India. And I'm not surprised, India is pursuing right now a policy of non-alignment. And I've talked about it in the past, but they don't align with anyone, right? Whatever they can get a good deal, they'll go there and shake hands. Even if it's a bloody dictator, I don't think India really cares much about Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's just not part of their geopolitical whatever ambitions, as far as I'm concerned. But then again, I'm not an expert in Indian politics, but based on what Modi has been doing with Ukraine, you still see some countries that don't really care, even if after such a terrible attack where it was clear was Russia's doing, where it's clear that Putin gave the command to strike this hospital, right? And then it went down the hierarchies down below to those that performed the launch and struck the hospital. They don't really care about that, it sucks. And one thing I need to mention as well, the bots, the troll farms are really at work yesterday throughout different social media platforms following this attack. I don't know if you guys have been on X or even on YouTube or Instagram and Facebook. It felt like the Russians were really, the trolls were really at work yesterday to showcase that this was Ukraine. It was either first they claimed that it was a Patriot or an air defense system that malfunctioned, or it intercepted the Russian missile, and then the fragments apparently destroyed an entire hospital, which is nonsense. To now they're saying that it was a false flag attack by Ukraine, right? Like, they were really at work yesterday. So one thing that we can never discount is how powerful Russian propaganda and this troll machine that they've built, they perfected over the, Ukraine will lose, and Putin for the win. It's a clear troll comment. There's nothing constructive behind that statement. And myself, I have nothing against, if you have a position that is not really entirely pro-Ukrainian or you're more neutral, fair enough. You have the right to your opinion, but you need to build on that, and you need to bring justifications as to why, let's say, you even support Russia. And so these trolls, obviously, it's evident when they come out because there's nothing constructive behind their statements. It's all about just making fun, laughing at others, and laughing at the pain of others as well. So they were really at work trying to pretty much prove that this wasn't Russia, right? So clearly, it was clear that Putin gave the command and then activated his troll farms just to spread this information throughout throughout media, to even give a little hint that maybe it wasn't Russia, maybe it was Ukraine, right? They're always like throwing this little conspiracy, but it's atrocious that even after 2.5 years, people still believe this garbage. You had like the shills, the pro-Russian shills, like I don't know if you know him. I think his name is Jackson or Jack Hinsley or something like that on X. Anyways, this is an American that is pretty much just pro-Russian all the way. And then he was just tweeting a bunch of pictures that like proved apparently that this was a Ukraine missile and this and that. Like, just I don't understand Americans, especially U.S. citizens, that are pretty much, well, actually, I get it. It's the money, most likely, being on the Kremlin payroll. So I do get it. Money sometimes is something that can really corrupt easily. So likely that these are Americans that are just on the Kremlin payroll. They get something out of it. But Jackson Hinkle, yeah, that's his name. And there's many others. I mean, Elon Musk as well. How did that happen? Like, I remember in the beginning of 2022 where he was relatively pro-Ukrainian, and then he switched out of nowhere to being the pro-Russian right after buying X. So there's some question marks here. He bought Twitter. Well, I kind of hate calling it X because it's really Twitter to me. And then as soon as he bought it, he started tweeting really pro-Russian content, giving out his peace plan. Like, we really care about a billionaire giving us a peace plan that has absolutely no experience in politics. It's ridiculous. Now, let me read some of your comments. Just another trader. Hi, Surfer. Thanks for coming. Thanks for tuning in. Tobias Eriksson, Sweden here. Slavo Ukraini. Thank you, Sweden. I absolutely love Sweden. I need to go visit Sweden one day. I don't know. I just love the Nordic countries, Scandinavia, and it's one of my wish lists is to go and visit Scandinavia. That is Norway, because I love hiking. Finland, obviously Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and yeah, all those great countries in the north. So I absolutely do love Sweden. And thanks to you guys, we have IKEA. It's a bad joke, but IKEA is always a loved furniture store here in Canada as well. And we also have the Saab conglomerate, and thanks to your weapons as well, Saab produces some really good, effective weapons, whether it be the Gripens to the modifications to the Leopard 2s that they've provided, the CV90s. I think they have some, different conglomerates working on that CV90 IFV vehicle. So Sweden really has some good quality products to offer, and also provides a lot of value for NATO. So I'm very happy for Sweden that they have been accepted into NATO, because that's a very valuable partner and really a country that stands for democracy as well. So it's a huge win. So yeah, I was talking a little bit about Ohmadit, the children's hospital, and the terrible tragedy that occurred there. And apart from the fact that Russia is able to still mass produce missiles, they've also managed to up their production of drones. That is, of course, Iran provided them initially with the Shahid drone. And then Russia started building their own, the Hiran 136 or 126. Essentially, it's a copy of the Shahid drone. So essentially, Iran passed the blueprints, and now Russia is able to mass produce them in their factories in Tatarstan, about 1,000-ish kilometers away from the front line. And actually, in March, if you guys remember, Ukraine flew a drone striking, I think, an apartment or some sort of workers' building in that entire area. So Ukraine can hit those factories. And I think it's important that Ukraine continues not only against its strikes against oil refineries and oil depots in Russia, but also against these important drone factories that Russia has in Tatarstan and perhaps even elsewhere at this point, because they essentially oversaturate the Ukrainian skies. They allow the Russians to see where the Ukrainian systems are, where their radars are. And then, as we've seen with the hypersonic missiles and their pathways, essentially they fly somewhere and then they do a 90-degree and they go up or down. And it's really hard to keep track of these Russian hypersonic missiles and long-range missiles that they throw at Ukraine, because they can change directions very quickly. And their pathways, they learn every single time they do a massive airstrike like this attack. Russia changes the pathways of their attacks. So they oversaturate the drones, and then they throw different bombs, different missiles. And that's obviously the oversaturation. Eventually, a few missiles do get through. And of course, Ukraine does the same when they attack Crimea. First, it's a drone warning, and then sometimes they use the Neptunes or other missiles, maybe Storm Shadows or Scalps. So it goes both ways. So that's why it's really important that Ukraine receives more air defense systems, and obviously has more capability. The tiered air defense system, right? Because let's say for a Russian drone to shoot it down, it doesn't make sense to use a Patriot missile. that costs millions of dollars versus a $50,000 drone, right? So it needs to be tiered air defense system where you have, the Gepards and some other Humvees with like some, small arms munition. Then you have Manpads. Then you have F-16s flying around, which will be one of their objectives when they come around in July. Well, it's been confirmed that they will start flying this month. And also you have the very expensive air defense systems afterwards, which need to shoot down these really advanced missiles that Russia's throwing. Let's read some of your comments. Hi from South Africa. Wondering when someone in the UN is going to point at Russia on the big stage and say enough is enough. Unfortunately, the UN is a useless institution. It's a useless institution. It won't do anything. It's just a forum. That's it. I think that's its only role right now. It's a forum where countries can pretty much talk, have an open conversation, but it won't do anything, right? It's like the UN will decide, the outcome of this war. So, I don't put much stock in any of these institutions, whether it be the UN or the Red Cross or even the Atomic Energy something commission. I apologize, I forget the name of this institution, but essentially they went to visit Zaporizhia power plant, which is currently occupied by the Russians, the Enerhodar nuclear power plant, and they said nothing's wrong. Apparently, everything's fine, but they haven't seen any Russian armored vehicles there, or because of course Russia's doing the North Korean tour again in Enerhodar, right? They just want to showcase what they want them to see, the commission. So again, there's so many useless institutions that are absolutely ineffective against nuclear powers like Russia, and they've shown how useless they are right now. So the again, as I've said, I don't put much stock on the UN. Hello from North Carolina. Hello. I emailed the UN Security Council office yesterday asking how Russia is still a member state. It makes no sense. Yeah. No, thanks. There's still a necessity to do the bureaucratic things, right? Writing to your representatives, wherever they are, to institutions to show your discontent, right? Because they're still institutions. But to actually, unfortunately, it's not them who are going to decide the outcome of this war, let's say, right? I think it's an important forum, but they won't enact anything important. Hey, Slavo Krini from Chicago. Hello back. Chris, I bought the same javelin in Vyshyvanka and it's way too big for me. You want it? I'll mail it, no strings attached. Um, I mean, I'm good, man. You can send it to somebody else if you want, but I have enough Vyshyvankas. To be very honest with you, Surfer, I actually have like 5 Vyshyvankas and I don't wear them often, so I think I'm good. But if there's perhaps somebody else within your circle or friends that want it, Surfer is the person. He has a free Vyshyvanka to give out, but it's really generous of you. Thank you. Appreciate it. So yeah, I was talking about again Okhmadit. So one, Russia still capable of mass producing long range missiles, and they're hypersonic missiles. They oversaturate, of course, with their drones as well. And unfortunately, number 3, so that's my third point, why Russia was able to attack so, I wouldn't say easily, but still be able to hit such a, precise target like Okhmadit, is because of the safe haven that is still currently allowed by the Biden administration in Russia. And what I'm talking about is, of course, that Ukraine is permitted to hit Russia 100 kilometers between the border with Ukraine and Russia. So that is most of Belgrade, a little bit of Bryansk, some other regions in Rostov. But anywhere further than 100 kilometers, the Biden administration says you cannot hit Russia. And that's where actually Russia has the majority of its airfields and military bases. This is not a coincidence, right? The Biden administration yet again limits Ukraine's ability to answer back Russia. And this is the biggest issue because right now they wouldn't have these jet fighters leaving these military airfields to strike Ukrainian positions and children's hospitals, because apparently the one that struck Okhmadit was actually raised from airfield not too far away from the border, about 200, 250 kilometers away. What if Ukraine could answer back and hit it today with the Atacams missiles or other long-range missiles or weaponry? So I think this is another thing that we need to look out for the NATO summit, is that Zelensky really needs to be pushing that through all the partners. We need to be able to answer back further and further within Russia. No civilian targets, totally understandable. Of course not. But military targets, everything from military bases, ammunition depots, command centers, uh, oil refineries, with ATACMs, imagine the destruction level can cause. You've seen how effective the Ukrainian drones are against the oil depots. It's been a very hot summer and winter and spring for Russia this year. Every week, one oil depot and one refinery guaranteed is going to be burning, much hotter than it's supposed to, thanks to the Ukrainian long range drones. But imagine the devastation and destruction a ballistic missile can do against an oil refinery or an oil depot. You know what I mean? So that's what I think. That's why I think Zelensky needs to really push that as well. Give us the permission to only use our drones. Well, they don't need permission for that, but use American weapons and Western weapons on Russia. I think the United States obviously understands that. The Biden administration understand that, but there's some inner politics, fears that the advisors have within his circle that are just saying, Mr. President, don't do this, right? This is too much escalation, or some other things. I don't know, but they know it. They know it. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that we need to be able to strike Russia as well, answer back. And so these three things are the main reasons why Russia was able to effectively target a children's hospital and commit another terrorist attack against the Ukrainian people. Now I'll talk a little bit about the U.S. elections, some other stuff, and before I start, I'll read some of your comments here. Jake Sullivan needs to be replaced. I mean, I think Jake Sullivan is just following orders. I don't know, but maybe it's just a mentality shift that needs to happen within the Biden administration. And don't get me wrong, I'm still very, I know it's complaining. It sounds like just complaining, but the US has done a lot for Ukraine. Even aside from all that, without the US, do you really think that Ukraine would be in this current position right now? I don't think so. We have to be realistic, right? The US has been instrumental in keeping Ukraine alive. The economic tap and the military tap has been opened, albeit not fully, but a little bit, to allow Ukraine to continue fighting. So that I'm recognizing the contribution of the United States, because without their leadership, to a certain extent, Ukraine would not have been here. But we know there's limitations, and we know that when they're saying they're committed, the Biden administration, to Ukraine's victory and they will back Ukraine, um, it doesn't really feel like that. It's just not enough. It's always a little bit. Again, the nomenclature of weapons that the United States has is massive, but we know the United States produces the Bradleys, the Abrams, the Paladins, artillery systems, of course, the F-16s, the different jet fighters. And of all that, the United States has thousands of. But they provide 100 to Ukraine of, let's say, Bradleys, less than 30 Abrams. You see the difference of the capacity of the United States to provide weaponry to Ukraine is so massive, right? And most of these systems, these tanks, these APCs that the United States has, are just sitting in deserts right now. They have no value whatsoever. They're never going to be used again, when they could be perhaps a little bit refurbished. You take out the good ones, refurbish them quickly, and give them to Ukraine. That could make a difference, right? That's where real commitment is. But when you're providing, 200 Abrams, I should say 200 Bradleys, 30 Abrams tanks, it's just, it's compared to what Russia has. And we've talked about it in my previous video yesterday, the analysis that Covert Cabal made. And I do know that there was somebody that commented about this video. Hey, everyone's seen the latest Covert Cabal tank video. Yeah. So, like, essentially, the Russian military has very few quality tanks in storage that they can refurbish. So, as I've said in my previous video, the Russians have about a maximum year and a half left of combat effectiveness and capacity, unless somebody steps in like China and provides them actual tanks, Chinese tanks. But I hope that doesn't happen. So we know that Russia still has offensive capabilities, but if Ukraine can just get enough of these, the quantity necessary to beat Russia in a quick manner, that could make a difference. So there's a lot of things to push during the NATO summit for Zelensky, including more F-16s, more defense systems that comes with the radar systems, the control system, and everything. So it's not just the Patriot and the missiles, but there's much more that comes with it. There's also the training that's necessary, more training of F-16 pilots and crewmen for the Patriots and other advanced systems that the United States has. More of that, and of course, providing more, assets, heavy assets like tanks and IFVs, APCs, more Max Pros, javelins, NLAWs, et cetera, et cetera. That needs to be increased. That's the true response following such a heinous attack by the Russians yesterday. That will send a message to Putin. You do this again, we'll double our efforts to help Ukraine. Some refineries are still on fire. And yeah, by the way, speaking of refineries on fire in Russia, there is one, just a little update, that was struck today by the Ukrainians. That's a really fat target because based on the video, this is in Volgograd, so formerly known as Stalingrad. Basically, the Ukrainians struck an oil depot today in the morning and huge fires right now. So the strategy, obviously, is also to continue striking oil refineries. And I've recently noticed that Ukraine is starting to strike more and more the Russian power grid around the bordering regions to Ukraine. That is Belgorod, Bryansk, Rostov. There's more and more attacks against substations and distribution lines to really weaken the Russian presence as well. That's a smart move. I think that there's also needs to be a new campaign on the Russian power grid. Eye for an eye here, right? Russia is proud when they send millions of Ukrainians to darkness, especially in the winter. Remember in 2022 where they were making fun of Europe, that soon they're gonna all freeze to death because Russia is turning off the gas. No more coal, no more gas, and what happened? Nothing even happened. Viktor Orban needs to go too. Yeah, I mean, he will go when the Hungarian people vote him out, and hopefully that will be soon. But he's the Trojan horse of Europe, unfortunately, where he goes on his little peace tour the past week. Right, he went to Kiev, then suddenly went to China and the Kremlin. Right, so the most important is the final destination. So he's sending a message to Putin now and Mr. Xi Jinping that here's what the Ukrainians have to say. But unfortunately, he's a Trojan horse. We know that he's a pro-Russian, and he'll try to also get a couple wins. If he plays it hard for himself. A little bit more funding from the EU and all that, more investments, and then forcing the Ukrainians into bad deals. It's also geopolitical for Hungary, the current Hungarian administration. Right, they're playing their own geopolitics in Eastern Europe. So that's that. Most of our tank storage are in good condition. And Eric, I believe you are apologize, I forgot, North Carolina. So yeah, in the United States. Yeah, most of it is in good condition. The United States has a good program. Even, weapons in storage, I assume are really well maintained, even then, right? Not saying it's ideal, but we've seen I guess some of you have seen how terrible Russian storage depots look like, and especially the tanks that they pretty much keep in open air for decades. I mean, you can imagine what type of quality you have there. Old T-72 sitting for decades outside, never been run again. I mean, you try to refurbish that, good luck. That's why you need 4 or 5 tanks to refurbish one Russian T-72 because, well, that's how, decades of negligence, that's what decades of negligence brings you. And thankfully, that's the situation because, that gives a more of a fighting chance for Ukraine as well. Because Russia is obviously very corrupt. Its programs never worked. The T-14 Armada program, where is it? It's been scrapped because Shoigu stole everything, right? He promised hundreds of tanks and then produced a few dozen, which can't even work because either the transmission doesn't work or whatever else. The engine's too small. So thankfully, there was the Russian corruption is also a factor in this war, which helps Ukraine. That is not that Ukraine isn't corrupt on its side. There are still some scandals that come out for Ukraine as well, but Russia is just on a much more massive scale because of the amount of revenue that they've been able to generate thanks to oil, right? Like they could have had a really modern military by this point if it wasn't an oligarchy in Russia. Like the amount of wealth truly that Russia has thanks to its oil industry is massive. That's how Putin grew so strong. And thankfully, they weren't able to convert this into like a much more modern military. But again, Russia was never capable of doing that. They always lived in a society of corruption. That's centuries. That's not even recent. That's just how Russia, Muscovy, has been operating for centuries through sheer corruption, assassinations, power vacuums, like insurrections. That's Russia's history in a nutshell. They don't like to talk about it, but that's pretty much them on a default mode. So it would always be like that, even if the Russians wanted. That's why, not saying that the majority of the Russians aren't trying to be more liberal and democratic, but there needs to be Western intervention. When Russia's defeated, the West needs to intervene, like within Russia, politically, democratically speaking, economically, far more. Because when Russia was left alone in the 90s, it really, and Putin fostered that emotion of like, this is the West's fault that the Soviet Union collapsed. And look at, how we're living in misery. They promised us, a quick recovery, and here we are. But it's the fault of these countries, right? Like it's not like we're going to be picking up the tab for Russia and building everything, but we need to guide them a lot more. And that's why intervention is necessary, just as it was with Germany. If after World War II, it had a painful history after, divisions, or Japan or South Korea. There's a lot of stories, success stories, where intervention from the West actually is fruitful if a nation wants it. That's also an important factor. If the nation takes it seriously, if a nation doesn't take it seriously, then you have in Afghanistan or in Iraq, where the message you're trying to push doesn't resonate with the population. Because again, invading a country just because you want to bring democracy doesn't really bring actual democracy. So I think that's where, following such a traumatic war with Ukraine, Western intervention needs to happen with Ukraine's guidance and other countries, but all the countries need to pitch in together and show a better way for Russia, and not a Versailles type of Treaty of Versailles type of punishment. Although I do think Russia needs to be paying Ukraine for all the damage, but more of like learning from our mistakes in the past, where if you punish at 100%, you're just going to create a society that's going to be vengeful, even more vengeful than before. But intervention means a lot of resources, means a lot of energy being invested into Russia. And is the West really ready for that? I don't think so. The West would be happy if tomorrow, and that's an unfortunate truth, if tomorrow Ukraine and Russia were to sign a peace agreement. That's another problem we dealt with it for the next couple of years. Finally, I think there's a lot of sentiments like that within different governments. They don't want to look at things long term like we did after World War II. It's pretty much, like I wish this problem is going to get resolved very quickly so it doesn't become my problem because I have internal problems. So there's that aspect as well. Hey guys from Arizona, Oblast. Hello, Cheryl. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Let's read some of your comments. My Hungarian relatives have all basically left Hungary now. They can't stand Orban, either live in Canada or Britain now. Interesting. Yeah, I don't really know much about Hungarian politics, to be honest, but let's not forget that Hungary also had its own empire, mini empires, a few centuries ago, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So I think there's a little bit of imperialism left within some of these politicians, where they say, look at who we were and look at us now, right? So maybe Orban also displays a little bit of this imperialism that exists within Hungary, where they kind of look at the past maybe in good ways, the political elite. I don't know. But I'm not an expert in Hungarian politics to be telling you what's really going on there. But I do know that many Hungarian people don't agree with what's going on and the position of the current government as well. And there's been protests in Budapest recently. So I have faith in the people. All right. Ukraine is cutting off Russian gas flowing through its territory January 1st. It'll affect Moldova and Transnistria mainly. I haven't read about that. I need to read about it, and the implications. But that is interesting if Ukraine does that. Yeah. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the US elections. And, obviously, speaking of the NATO summit, we also know that obviously Biden, this could be his, I hope not, because as I've mentioned many times in the past, I think a Trump administration would be devastating for Ukraine. Based on the comments by Trump, I think that he's going to completely remove support to Ukraine. I believe that. And I think we need to be more positioned towards that.